Welcome to Come Rain or Shine with Dan Cockrell. This is the show where we explore the power of leadership and culture on your organization's success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and Dan is still frolicking in Mexico. How's it going down there, Dan?
It is good. We've met some really, really interesting people. There's a conference this week that Valor and I are speaking at, and they've invited speakers, a couple of from the U.S. and a lot from South America. And we met some young people, 25 years old, startup companies, and they're working on medical psychedelics for hospitals. One guy is has an app to help people with critical conditions, monitor and kind of their condition and stay positive. And so anyway, lots of really it's we kind of luckily we learn kind of more than we teach here when we get to these kind of events. And we're at a city called Leon, Mexico, which is about a 1 hour flight from Mexico City. Beautiful place, really nice people, great weather. So it's always nice to travel and meet these people from all over the world and how cool people are.
Well, the way you described it, I really like it that you're basically getting paid to hang out in Mexico and learn stuff.
That's one way to look at it. It's bad karma to think about it that way, but I guess you could define it that way. But yeah, uh, when you come here, you just got to be ready to engage, ready to talk, ready to spend time. And I've been in the mode of asking lots of questions, like we talked about on the other podcasts, and have learned a ton from this group.
Well, I've seen it. Speakers will have a conference like that, and perhaps Dan's right. It's bad karma to say it like that, but I've seen speakers that will have a conference or a speaking event, and they show up just for it. They do their thing and they leave, and they don't take time to get to know people. They don't ask questions. But
Right.
Dan's not like that. He's hanging out. He's learning, and yeah, he'll get paid for his
Yeah.
presentation as well. But he he adds to himself, but he adds to other people and all the extra stuff that he does.
That's the idea. So speaking of learning, today's message, I think I've been thinking about is short and sweet, but it's this idea of educating yourself and developing a point of view. And recently, I've really been honing in on some topics that I want to get better at. I want to get more deeper knowledge and how to talk about it and how to explain it to others. One is AI, artificial intelligence. That has been one that we read about it every single day, but when it came down to it, I'm like, at a base level, how does it work? I'm not a programmer, but at a base level, what's the what how do you think about implementing it? What's the logic behind it? What are the case studies that can be used? How do you start with it in a company? And so I went on Coursera and signed up for a free course with Andrew. I don't know how you pronounce his last name. His last name is spelled NG, Andrew Nig, I think it is. And he was with Google for a long time, and he does some very simple videos, and it's like a 3 hour course, and he takes sections and explains here's the methodology to artificial intelligence. Here's some case studies of how you put it in place. Here's how you think about structuring it in your organization if you want to start learning about it and using it. And now I got like a decent working knowledge of AI. There's a lot more to it, but I have a good knowledge of that. I wanted to learn a lot more about strategy. How do I think about strategy and talk about strategy? It's such an overused term. So I went on Amazon. I Googled the best books on strategy, like 1,000 books pop up, and I look for some names and people have credibility. I get a couple audiobooks, download them, and I've listened to 2 books on strategy over the past few weeks. I Googled some articles, downloaded 5 or 6 articles about strategy, went on Harvard Business Review, put strategy, and got like 5 more articles there. So basically, from 2 weeks ago, I am kind of like quadrupled my knowledge around this topic from different authors. It doesn't mean everyone's right, but it's helped me develop a point of view on it. So my message is just everyone, if there's something that you're about to deal with, let's say you're about to have a really hard conversation with a direct report, there's performance issues, and you're like, oh gosh, I got to go talk to them. Go online and just Google how to have difficult conversations. You're going to see videos, you're going to see TikTok videos, YouTube videos, books, articles. Everyone has something to say about it. and you got to, you're going to have to look at various sources. It doesn't mean everyone's right, but you can look at 5, 6, 7 different sources of advice, and then pick the one that you think is the most appropriate, and it's going to help you prepare even more. And I know this is very common sense, it's very basic, but just because the information's at our fingertips doesn't mean we're always leveraging it to actually get stuff done and do things. And everyone says, well, I need to go take I need to go back to school, or I need to take a course. No, you don't. You can just Google things, get a little, brush up on whatever competency, whatever behavior you want to get better at, and just do a cram session. Get some books, get some articles, get on it, and then you're going to use that information. Project management. You may have been assigned a project, and you're like, gosh, I don't know where to start. Well, probably at work, you have some mentors or some people you can talk to. But once you Google how to get a project started, and you're going to find templates and all kinds of stuff out there. So once again, I know this is basic, but it's there's just so much stuff at your fingertips that can help you get the ball rolling and help you develop a point of view and help you get a competency around things you want to become an expert in, or maybe things that you haven't done in a long time and you just need basic skills to get started.
This is interesting to think about. And I know, Dan, I see it sometimes. I do it sometimes. I've not seen you do it, but that doesn't mean you don't do it. It becomes really not interesting, although it is interesting. It becomes really easy to use information as entertainment and not do anything with it. So let's say you read these books, you read these articles, take the course. How do you make sure that you're not doing that just as a form of entertainment, that it's actually something you're going to apply?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've been using Audible, so when I have some extra time, I pop out my earpods, pop them in, listen to a chapter. And while I'm listening to it, I pull out my phone and I have a little note section on the phone, and I have the name of the book I'm listening to. And so as it's going through the book, I listen for quotes, I listen for examples, and I just type those on my note. So I'm taking notes myself on I want to remember from this book. Or sometimes they'll say, if you're interested in that, this is a great book on that topic. I'm like, oh, let me take a note there. That's going to be the next book I'm going to listen to. Or they may mention a website, or they may mention an example of the founder of Intel did this. Here's an example of what they did that's proving our point. And I just make a note of the name of the founder of Intel. I write that down, and then later I'll go back and Google them and find that story. And maybe I can use that story in a keynote speech. Maybe I can use it in an article I'm writing. Maybe I can use it in a podcast, but I'm getting those reference points. So it's not just about just listening passively. I'm looking for very specific examples in the book that I can write down and have into my notes so it can stay with me, that I'll have to be able to apply at some later time.
Yeah, that is nice, because I fall into that trap. I listen to podcast books and sometimes do it for entertainment. But if you are deliberate, like Dan said, take notes, write down books that are mentioned, write down articles, other people that are mentioned when you're reading. Here's an example of how this has worked for me. I read a lot of books, and Dan's father one time told me, you read too many books and you don't know what's going on in the world. So cut out books, cut out as many books, and keep up with what's going on. So I subscribed to The Economist because it seemed like a pretty good compromise. So now that's how I keep up with what's going on in the world. Although, as a side note, I think I enjoyed life a little better not knowing what's going on in the world, because my goodness.
You don't always have to follow all the advice.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But it is a good source to just do quick hit articles or in depth. If I find something that interests me, you can go really in depth. And so that's one way I have made this change of developing a new point of view that Dan is talking about. Mine right now happens to be on current events, because now I can connect it. Okay, this is what I thought about the world. This is what's really going on. And then I have a vast library of books that I've read about things, and say, how does that line up with what I've learned about things in the past, or different books on management or whatnot. So it has been interesting to have develop a new point of view on current events based on what I've read, based on what I've learned, and see how it lines up. But I've also done this. Well, Dan had to do this when it came to podcasting. It wasn't that many years ago. Dan was new to podcasting, and then he became wonderful at interviewing people. And that's why, if you followed this show for a long time, that was the focus for a couple of years, was interviewing people. And now we've shifted the focus again, where it's more about Dan sharing what he's learned. So a different point of view when we talk now came from all of those interviews Dan did.
Yeah. Yep. That's right. And I think going back to something you mentioned, Jody, about are you listening for entertainment, or are you listening for, for specific tactics and things you can do? I think you can listen to books both ways. There's times where it just depends how much. My problem is I want to be very productive, so I don't want to have to listen to the book twice. So I'm taking the notes, so I won't forget things. And there's things you can tag. You can press a button and it'll save that part of the podcast. But it means you have to go back, or the book, you have to go back and listen to it again. Obviously, if you have a paper book, you can highlight things. But I like to transfer all those little nuggets into a document that I can have later and read through. And so I have a whole document. The theme is strategy, and every time I read a book on strategy or an article, I put the notes in that document. And so if I'm ever doing a presentation or consulting on strategy, I can go pull that to remind me of all the things I've learned about that. And other times you say, you know what? I'm not going to worry about just taking these notes. I'm just going to sit back and take it in and listen to the story. And it also often depends what kind of book it is. If there's lots of storytelling in the book, it's easier just to listen. And it's not, you may not remember everything, but you're going to have these themes and they're going to seep into your brain. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to be in a conversation a week later, a month later, 6 months later, a year later, and someone's going to bring up a topic and you may say, I was reading a book. I forget which book it was, but this is a story that was in there, and all of a sudden you're bringing it back again. And so it's between, you want to, I think, balance it between capturing the data that's going to be tactics that things you can do. And also sometimes just broader knowledge that's going to just kind of give you a different point of view that kind of gets into your subconsciousness that will come forward when you get into situations that it's appropriate to use it.
Dan touched on something that I think is important. Even if you listen to books or read books as entertainment, go through a course and don't necessarily take action right away, you will find in a conversation a week later, a month later, a year later, it did shape your point of view, and you will reference something. And even if you don't quite remember where you heard it, just the fact that you read that book, listened to that book, watched that course, you will find it shaped your point of view. So the more content you consume, even if you are not taking notes and taking action, it does help shape a point of view. So it ends up helping. And I find that happens all the time, that I will end up referencing a book that I've previously read, or a video I saw, a course I saw, a podcast I listened to. And Dan, I heard it once said, and it came from Zig Ziglar, that, sorry, 1 second. Zig Ziglar once said the first time he quotes somebody, he would say, Dan Cockerell said, and the second time he would quote you, he would say, I've heard it said. And then after you've quoted it for a while, you say, as I've always said, right? So that's how it works. You eventually, it becomes something that you saw or read that changed your point of view, but eventually that becomes your point of view. And he was saying it kidding around, but there really is something to that when you hear Dan say something, it is, as Dan Cockrell said, and eventually it becomes, as I've always said.
Yeah. And we found that in some of our consulting. We used to always say, well, at Disney, blah, blah, blah. And after a while, people are like, we're sick of hearing about Disney. We just want to know what you know. And then we learned after a while, we've learned that this is the best approach. And then now it's us. We're getting credit for it. It's our thing. And we've learned that over time. So I think sometimes we get overzealous and having to quote all our sources versus going, you know what, I've spent time learning, and here's 3 things I know about that topic, and then use them.
Well, Dan has talked about his approach on, I want to learn something new. I want to learn about AI. I'm going to find books, find articles, a course, and just see what's out there. So Dan, let's say you wanted to take your first vacation to Mexico and you've never been there. What do you do then?
Well, I mean, this is a little different. You can go look at a bunch of articles, bunch of websites, and that's going to take a little more time. And you can do that. I'm not saying not to do that. Or you just call MVP because they're going to take care of you, and you know they are, and they're going to do all the research for you. They've read the books, and they're going to distill down what you need to know so you can just go enjoy your time there.
That's right. Magical Vacation Planner. Just give them a call. Then you don't have to read the articles about where you're going to go in Mexico or the cruise line you're about to sail on. You can reach Magical Vacation Planner at 407-442-0257. Let them know you want to share their point of view about your vacation destination, and they'll fill you in. All right, Dan, you gave us some insight, but I always like to finish off with something we can go and do right away. And we heard you talk about developing a new point of view. So let's say now all right, Dan told us this is how he does it. I am mildly interested in a certain topic. And I want to add one thing here is Dan was talking about him taking notes, and I read a lot of books and treat them as entertainment or just to get their ideas. But if I'm really interested in a topic, I think I'm answering the question I didn't ask Dan. If I'm really interested in a topic, I will have a notebook just for that. I've got one for copywriting, one for speaking, one for just a couple other subjects. And it doesn't matter what book I'm reading. If I find something that needs to be in my notebook, I open that notebook and I write it in there. And I usually reference what book it came from. And then over time, I will have a notebook that is pages and pages and pages of speaking tips or whatnot from, it could be 10 different books. It's just over time, I always return to that same notebook and add to it. Dan does it digitally. I do it physically, but it's the same concept. So Dan, I just answered a question I didn't ask about where do you begin? How do you start? And I think that's it. If you have a topic, you just read a book and start taking notes.
Yeah. Because in a lot of our careers, whatever you do, there's a handful of things you want to be really good at, and you may already be good at it and want to make improvements, or you may not be good at it or know much about it, but you know you should be good at it. And so you just start building this little bank and you do your own little course on that topic. But the course is unstructured and it's up to you to just go find things. There's so much out there today and it's all there. Once again, you have to have critical thinking. It's not all the right stuff. What I find typically the stuff that pops up, it's using the same basis of approach, how to give feedback or how to plan a meeting. That's something else I'm looking at right now. How do you have a great meeting? And I've read some articles and saw some videos on it. And there's some that I'm like, no, that's not, I don't think that's the best way to run a great meeting. And I'm looking for that one example. And I don't think I'm going to get one example. I'm going to get different tactics that I can pull together to create my own best way to do that. So, but capturing it, that's an important piece. The entertainment piece, taking it in is one thing, but I think having a system and building a reference system that you have that you can go back and that's the big thing with filing and stuff. Can you find it later? And if you can't find it later, then that's a problem. So you just got to have a nice logical system that makes sense to you to be able to find things, and then add that documentation. And it's incredible. Even sometimes I go into Dropbox and look at presentations we did 3-4 years ago. I'm like, wow, there's some good stuff here, and there's some stuff I'd never do again. But you forget what you learned previously, and you got to go review it.
All right. Well, now you know if there's something that you are interested in. And Dan mentioned artificial intelligence. You could go into Chat GPT or Bard or whatever you use and just say, I'm interested in learning about speaking. What are the top 10 books to help me become a better speaker? And I wouldn't completely trust it, but it's a good place to start. It's pick a couple books from the list and go from there. So
absolutely.
There you go. And if you have any follow-up questions about developing a new point of view, reach out to Dan. You can find him at dancockerell.com. Thank you for listening to Come Rain or Shine.